Resourceful Designer, episode 254, Overcoming Imposter Syndrome.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He can't stand the taste of olives. Mark Descote.
Nope, I never have. I'm the type of guy who's willing to try just about anything. Even things that I know I didn't like before, like mushrooms. I always hated mushrooms growing up, but now I love them. But olives, I've tried them many times over the years, and I just can't bring myself to swallow them. Oh well. In this week's episode, I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome and how to get over it. I'm also going to share a tip for convincing clients to see things your way. Now, what have I been up to? Well, since I last talked to you, I've completed a couple of websites, and I'm also doing a revamp on a small website that I have. It's something I started with my son, and I'm just having a little bit of fun just revamping it and getting it to look a little bit more modern. I created it quite a few years ago with him, and it's an affiliate site. We make a couple of bucks a month off of it. But I thought now that I have a few more skills, I might as well bring the website up to date. I've also completed several podcast artworks over the last couple of weeks and have done a few brand audits, which is a new service I'm offering on my podcastbranding.co website. So I'm doing brand audits for podcasters, and I've gotten a few of those. Now, on another note, I'm happy to announce that Resourceful Designer, the podcast you're listening to right now, is now available on the Samsung free app. And that's in the US only right now. Samsung released podcasts on the app. The free Samsung free app is available on Galaxy S21, Galaxy S20, Galaxy Note 20, Galaxy S10, and Galaxy Note 10 devices. And they've only introduced a few podcasts for now, and I was lucky that they asked if Resourceful Designer would be one of them. So I'm one of the first podcasts available on that platform, and eventually this will be rolled out to the rest of the world, and sometime in the future, they're going to roll this out to not just their smartphones, but all Samsung smart devices will have this app, which means at some point you may be able to listen to Resourceful Designer on your Samsung fridge or toaster, providing it's a smart device. And if you ever do, drop me a line and let me know. I'd love to know that somebody was listening to me on their toaster. So that's a little bit of what I've been up to. Now, I've been spending a lot of time in the Resourceful Designer community. You know, the community is going strong. There's several new people have joined this month, and it's great to see these new members interacting with the old members, introducing themselves so we get to know them, and in the process, they get to know us. And I love how this is a growing community of designers who are serious enough to invest in their business and in themselves. And I love what this community is becoming. But I also don't want it to become so big that it loses the intimate community feel that it currently has. And for that reason, I've decided that I'm going to cap the membership at 50 members. I believe that limiting the community to 50 members will allow us enough diversity of skills and experience and knowledge while still remaining a close enough knit group where we can really get to know each other instead of becoming a group where we feel like we're in there with a bunch of strangers. So once the community reaches 50 members, I will close the enrollment and probably start a waiting list. And after that point, I will only admit new members if someone decides to leave the community. So the reason I'm letting you know is that now's your chance. If you're serious about your design business and want to be a part of this elite group of like-minded people, then sign up for the Resourceful Designer community today before space runs out. Visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community. And now this week's tip of the week. Now this week's tip actually applies to all aspects of life, but I'll use it in the context of our design industry. When a client asks you for something that you know is not a good idea, never say, "I don't think that's a good idea." By saying that, you are arguing with the person, the client. You are telling them that the idea that they came up with is not good. And whether you intend to or not, you are hurting their ego. And if the way you talk to people requires them to dismantle their ego in order to see your side of an argument, it'll be much, much harder to get them to agree with you. If you imply that the client is wrong, you immediately put them on the defensive, and they may feel attacked. They may try to hold their ground in order to save face or just to prove a point. So the trick here is to argue with the idea itself and not the person who presented the idea. And you do this by changing how you word your arguments. Don't say, "I don't think that's a good idea," which puts the focus on the person by telling them that you don't think their idea is good. Instead, say something like, "Here's my issues with that idea," or "Here's why I believe that idea isn't in our best interest." It's so subtle, but by changing your wording in this way, you switch the meaning of what you're saying from an argument against the person to an argument against the idea without implementing them. And by taking the client and, of course, their ego out of the argument, it'll be much easier to turn them into an ally and get them to agree with your side. So always argue with the idea and not the person. And that applies to dealing with clients and dealing with anybody in your everyday life. And that's just a little bit of psychology for you today. And now, overcoming imposter syndrome. Now, I don't know if it's the pandemic, the stress of everything we've had to endure over this past year, but lately I've seen more and more designers struggling with imposter syndrome. I've seen it in the Resourceful Designer community, in Facebook groups, and just talking with people I know in the design space. I don't know what's causing so many people in our profession to doubt themselves and their abilities. But if you are one of them, let me tell you a little secret that may make you feel better. Although everyone feels imposter syndrome at one time or another, it's most often felt by high achievers who have trouble celebrating their successes, no matter how small or how large. So, if you're suffering from imposter syndrome, there's a good chance that you are a high achiever. And that's a good thing, and something that should make you feel a bit better. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with the term imposter syndrome, it refers to an internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. In other words, you don't think you're as good as other people think you are. Now, personally, I've always suffered from imposter syndrome when it comes to illustration. If you're a longtime listener of this podcast, you've heard me on a number of occasions say that I am not an illustrator. And yet, the truth is, I can draw. I've been drawing my whole life. Maybe not on a regular basis. I mean, I haven't honed my skills or anything, but it's not like I've never doodled before. And I've had many people over the years tell me that I'm really good at it. But in my mind, I'm not. I look at what others like Andrew or Kat or Krista from the Resourceful Designer community can do, and my skills pale in comparison to theirs. In my mind, the only reason people tell me I'm good at illustrating is because they don't want to make me feel bad by telling me the truth. That is imposter syndrome. And you know what? In this case, it's okay. It's okay because I've never wanted to be an illustrator. So if I don't think I'm good enough, so be it. I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me. But that's not the issue that I've been seeing lately among fellow designers. Imposter syndrome becomes really serious when it involves what you are trying to do to earn a living. What I'm seeing are a lot of people with the skills, the talent, and the knowledge to do something well, but who feel that they're still not good enough to be compensated for what they're offering. People who are competent web designers, but don't think they're good enough to charge $5,000 or $10,000 or $50,000 for a website. Or talented logo designers who have never charged more than a couple of $100s for a logo project. That's imposter syndrome. These people have the idea in their head that if they charge that much, others will think that they're a fraud and they'll be exposed. These are the same people who are afraid to approach clients that they really want to work with because they don't think that they're good enough to work with those clients. Is that how you feel? Are you unable to internalize your success because you're afraid of being outed as an unqualified fraud? Let me tell you something. You are not alone. In fact, everyone battles imposter syndrome at one point or another, even those who seem to have it all. Actors Tina Fey, Emma Watson, and even Tom Hanks have all said in interviews that no matter how well they do, they always feel inadequate, and that at any moment, someone's going to find out that they're not that great actors and that they don't deserve the success that they've achieved. Best-selling author John Green, who's won several literary awards and whose books have been turned into motion pictures, says that he feels like a fraud all the time. He said that he doesn't feel like he knows how to write a novel and doesn't think that he ever will. He finds pleasure in the process of writing, but he thinks that everything he writes sucks. If talented, successful people such as this suffer from imposter syndrome, what chances do you have? Well, the truth is, you have as much chance as them and as everyone else. In order to overcome that feeling, you have to realize that everything you've done in your life so far to this point, every achievement you've achieved, no matter how small or how large, was something you were not qualified to do before you actually did it. You were not qualified to walk until you walked. You were not qualified to ride a bike until you rode a bike. You weren't qualified to use the software that you now use on a daily basis until you actually were. You weren't able to complete design projects for clients until you eventually did. You are the person you are today because you've successfully achieved thousands, if not millions, of things that you were previously not able to do. That's life. It's how we grow. It's how we mature as people. And that means that everything that you don't think you're qualified for right now is just something you haven't achieved yet. I want to share something with you right now, and I really wish I could remember where I first heard it so I can actually give credit where credit is due. But this is something I heard many years ago, and it actually changed the way I look at life. Somewhere, right now, there are people who are less skilled, less talented, and less knowledgeable than you are doing the exact thing that you don't feel you are qualified for. Think about that. Regardless of your abilities, there are designers out there who are not as good as you, who are succeeding at the things that you wish you could be doing. When I first heard that statement many years ago, it changed the way I look at things. It helped me to break through my inhibitions and become the person I am today. I no longer look at obstacles as something I'm not good enough for. I look at them as simply things that I've not achieved yet. And that mentality has helped me to grow and to achieve things I once thought impossible. Do you know that I faced imposter syndrome before starting this very podcast? Way back then, I thought, who am I to be talking to you about running a design business? There are so many other designers out there who are much more qualified and successful than I am. Why should I be doing this? But I pushed through anyway, and I launched this show. And even though I know I'm not the most qualified person to instruct you, I admit that, I know that, I still have something to share. So it didn't stop me. And the thousands of people who listen to each podcast episode every week must think so as well, or they wouldn't keep listening, and neither would you. You don't have to be the best at something in order to overcome imposter syndrome. You only have to be willing to try. Remember that there's no such thing as perfection. What there is good enough, and nobody can ask any more of you than that. If you can design a $200 logo, there's no reason why you can't design a $2,000 logo. If you can design a $1,000 website, there's no reason why you can't design a $10,000 website. You have the skills. You have the know-how. You just have to do it. Because it's not because you're not qualified. You just simply haven't done those things yet. Work, just like the rest of life, should be a challenge. You need to reach if you want to get anywhere. Because you too can succeed. And you know that's true because of what I said earlier, of all the less qualified people than you who are doing just that. They're succeeding. Don't let those people show you up. And you know what? If you do try something and you fail, just chalk it up to a learning experience and then try again. I mean, you're only human after all. And feeling incompetent is not the same thing as being incompetent. And I know you're not the latter. If you were, you wouldn't be listening to me right now. So if you're feeling imposter syndrome, find somebody to talk it out with. Sometimes all it takes to overcome imposter syndrome is to talk it through with others, especially people who understand you. That's where places like the Resourceful Designer community are so great. We've all been there and know how it feels, and we're more than happy to guide you through it. And in case you are currently suffering from imposter syndrome, and what I've said so far hasn't been much help, I want to share something that Valerie Young, who is the internationally recognized expert on imposter syndrome, as she put it in her TED Talk, which I'll link to in the show notes for this episode. The only difference between people who feel imposter syndrome and those who don't is that the same situation that triggers imposter feelings in some triggers different thoughts in others. That's it. That's the only difference. So the only way to stop feeling like an imposter is to stop thinking like an imposter. For example, someone who suffers from imposter syndrome might think they are not as good as the others in their group, and they're afraid they'll be discovered as a fraud. Where those who don't suffer from imposter syndrome know that even if they are not as good as the others in their group, that's okay. They can't be the best at everything after all. Valerie Young has literally written the book on imposter syndrome, and I highly encourage you to go watch her TED Talk. It's only 6 minutes long, and it's well worth the time. I'm also going to link to an article where she shared her 10 steps to overcoming imposter syndrome, which you might find interesting. I was going to share them here on the podcast, but they are copyrighted materials, so I think it's just best to link back to her article where you can read them. But if you do take one thing from this episode, I hope that it is what I shared with you before, the statement that made such an impact on my own life. Somewhere, right now, there are people who are less skilled, less talented, and less knowledgeable than you are, doing the exact thing that you don't feel you're qualified for. And that's just not right. So get out there and do it. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. Now, I would love to know, are you suffering from imposter syndrome, or have you in the past and you've gotten over it? Please share your story. Visit resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 254 and leave a comment for this episode. And before I go, I want to remind you that the Resourceful Designer community is booming now. We've got a bunch of new members, but I will be shutting it off once I reach 50. And if you don't want to regret missing your opportunity, I suggest you sign up as soon as possible. Visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community. And don't forget my tip of the week. If a client, or anybody else for that matter, tells you something that you don't think is right, you don't think it's a good idea, whatever argument you have, make sure the argument is with the idea itself and not the person. When you do that, you'll win many more arguments than you'll lose. So that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you found it useful. Imposter syndrome is a really important topic, especially right now. I don't know why, but so many people are suffering or talking about it. So I hope this one was helpful for you. Until next time, I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your design business and reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.